The latest bewildering developments on the state of the ceasefire in Gaza. The prisoners still held by both sides. The news outlets captivated by the Israeli narrative, regardless of the facts. The LA Times wants to give readers counterpoints to its opinion pieces, arguments that are being generated by artificial intelligence. And the ADL and its MO of equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. We take a look at the Anti-Defamation League. "17 months into the genocide in Gaza, we have reached yet another critical stage. Israel has resumed its blockade of humanitarian aid and threatened to cut off the supply of water and power to desperate Palestinians. All because Hamas has refused to agree to change the deal the two sides signed 7 weeks ago and free more Israeli captives. The headlines now coming out of the international media would have you believe that Hamas, and not the Netanyahu government, has demanded these changes to the ceasefire agreement. Israeli officials somehow insist there's enough food in Gaza, and you will not see many Israeli news outlets reporting on the undeniable evidence of malnutrition there. Plus, it's not like the Israelis are mincing their words on this. They call it part of their hell plan for Palestinians. Despite all of that, and the open resumption of war crimes, global media organizations keep headlining this story in the way that they do, the Israeli way. To better understand the latest developments coming out of Gaza, it is best to disregard many of the headlines the international media have been churning out. The ones that say or even suggest that Hamas and not Israel is responsible for the looming collapse of the ceasefire.
When I look at the headlines, the statement that is constantly missing is Israel violates ceasefire agreement.
There is an agreement. One party is trying to redefine the terms of an agreement. Another party is seeking to continue to implement an agreement. Israel has attempted to shift the goalposts.
They've cut off food supplies into Gaza, which were meager to begin with, and they're now threatening to cut off electricity and water. What they're doing is criminal, it's pathological, it's typical also.
And the people who are going to lose here, as usual, are the people of Palestine in Gaza.
Another underreported aspect of this story, Israel, which has long denied that it's been blocking humanitarian aid from getting into Gaza, persistently saying it's much more complicated than that, is now admitting that is what it's doing. Openly, casually branding its renewed collective punishment of Palestinians as its hell plan, while accusing Hamas of hoarding food, starving its own people. Trotting out government spokesmen like David Mencer, who have sunk to new levels of depravity in order to defend the morally indefensible.
Hamas have hoarded for months and months of supplies. They have enough food to fuel an obesity epidemic.
Typical Israeli propaganda, this complete denial that anything untoward has ever happened in the Gaza Strip, least of all a policy of starvation resulting in famine. One aspect of Israeli propaganda has been kind of systematic body shaming. Whenever they come across a Palestinian journalist or civil servant or anyone else who doesn't have a perfect physique, it's, you know, famine, what famine? Look at how much this person weighs.
Reminder that this is the same David Mencer who said that the burning of the 20-year-old Palestinian young man who was tied up to an IV still in the Gaza hospital, he referred to that incident as Pollywood, a version of Hollywood.
There is an element of what we call here in Israel, Hollywood, fabrication of these sorts of events within Gaza. Now,
David Mencer would make Joseph Goebbels blush in the amount of lying that he has done over the past 16 months. We have seen Palestinian children die from malnourishment, so there is really no evidence to back up anything that David Mencer says.
What we're seeing is an attempt to preemptively justify the next round of war crimes, priming domestic and international opinion, and let's use the correct words. The horrendous lies, deceit, dishonesty are going to be taken to a new level. Given these statements, I would expect that the next thing we will hear from the Israeli officials is that don't worry when you see Gazans looking gaunt and famished. It's probably just that there's too much Ozempic in Gaza that they've been taking. That's the level of absurdity and inhumanity that this has reached.
As it happens, absurdity and inhumanity are both at the core of Donald Trump's plan to ethnically cleanse Gaza, as depicted in an AI video that Trump shared of what the new Gaza would look like. As ludicrous as that proposal is, moving 2 million Palestinians to Egypt, Jordan, and beyond, and magically transforming the Strip into a beach resort, at least it produced a reaction from Arab leaders. They gathered in Cairo this past week, where they backed an alternative plan put forward by the Sisi government, in which Hamas would surrender its control of Gaza to the Palestinian Authority, with Egypt also playing a major role, overseeing a reconstruction project that would cost $53 billion. The Trump administration initially gave that proposal the thumbs down, but has shifted since, saying it's prepared to discuss it. Not that Palestinians had placed much hope in an Arab summit meeting that came so late in the game.
Palestinians, can't really rely on their Arab neighbors. Take the King of Jordan, who sat in front of Trump and kept bowing his head and saying, we will try and do what we can to help Trump bring about peace. And you see Dubai having all of these agreements with Israel. And that includes Egypt. They have shown time and again that they will not do anything for the Palestinians.
What has changed with Trump's proposal is that Palestinians will no longer be slaughtered in their homeland, but will be collectively expelled to Egypt, Jordan, and elsewhere. Trump is basically asking these Arab leaders to participate in an initiative that is tantamount to these leaders signing their own political death warrants, and they're not prepared to commit political suicide for the sake of good relations with the United States and Israel. It is on that basis that their role has begun to transform from inert spectators to more active governments with a stake in the matter.
Arab people will accept the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. So Arab regimes are trying to buy time in order to look like they're trying to do something, whereas in fact they're not really doing much of anything, and I can't see how any of these plans are going to come to fruition, given that they're all premised on Hamas basically dissolving itself somehow and disappearing into the sand. That's not going to happen.
And one part of the problem is there is not Palestinian leadership. This should be a Palestinian plan, agreed in a unified fashion. But we don't have a Palestinian leadership willing, empowered, capable of you know what? Goading, haranguing, embarrassing even Arab states into getting further from that US-Israeli dictated comfort zone.
Donald Trump was in that zone on Wednesday night when he posted what he called his last warning to Hamas and the people of Gaza. Release all the Israeli captives or you are dead. The majority of Israeli media outlets might welcome that message. But that same day, Israeli officials appear to have leaked information to the American outlet Axios in order to derail a development they didn't like, that the Trump administration was in direct, secret talks with Hamas over the remaining captives and how to end the war in Gaza. Prior to that, when the Netanyahu government chose to sabotage the ceasefire and cut off food, water, and electricity to Gaza, it leaked that news via 2 Israeli outlets, the state-owned network Khan and the newspaper Israel Hayom. Benjamin Netanyahu knows those organizations are in his corner, along with countless other ones overseas.
Thank you, Jonathan, for expressing emotionally the huge emotional pain that we're all enduring right now in Israel. Thank you.
Many of us no longer have an ability to either be disappointed or shocked in the media coverage. It has stretched the credibility of that reporting beyond snapping point. The party trying to necessitate more war, more killing, more war crimes is the party that is given a break in the media, listened to, quoted and interviewed as credible sources from the Israeli government, from the Israeli military.
And they still have plenty of weapons. Tons and tons and tons of them.
The reason why more and more people don't turn to the New York Times or CNN is because they recognize these media outlets for what they are. Tools. They're complicit in the story that they're helping to manufacture. I don't think it's possible that American newspaper editors don't understand what's happening, can't understand the lies coming out of Tel Aviv. It's clear that they are invested in the perpetuation of the genocide in Gaza. To say that they failed is to be generous. It's not a failure. It's a success. They've succeeded in repackaging Israeli narratives for the consumption of Western audiences.
To the U.S. now, where the owner of the Los Angeles Times has pushed through a strange new online feature, an AI bias meter that is already setting off alarm bells at the paper. Tariq Nafi has been on this story.
It's called Insights, and the idea is to give readers of the LA Times a so-called counterpoint to the paper's opinion pieces. Essentially, the AI-generated feature will argue against the article you've just read and even tell you what sort of political bias the author has. The paper's billionaire owner, Patrick Soon-Shiong, says Insights will help heal our divided nation through a platform that enables civil discourse. Lofty ambitions, it didn't take long, though, for journalists to find a darker side to the tech. Last week, the paper published this column on the history of racism in the writer's California hometown and the role played by the Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist group. The Insight bot's counterpoint was that the KKK was misunderstood, merely a product of white Protestant culture rather than an explicitly hate-driven movement. That particular insight was removed, but not before it earned the LA Times a ton of embarrassing headlines. Reporters also noted that Insights relied on dodgy sources. It's one of a number of clumsy forays media outlets have made into AI lately, but the larger story here is the politics and how media owners are recalibrating under Donald Trump's second term. During last year's US elections, Soon-Shiong ended the LA Times' traditional practice of endorsing the Democratic candidate. Another billionaire, Jeff Bezos, blocked his paper, The Washington Post, from endorsing Kamala Harris over Trump. Last week, he ordered the Post's opinion section to focus on personal liberties and free markets. Both media owners have been upfront about what they call the media's liberal bias. They have much less to say about their extensive business dealings with the US government. But kowtowing to the new president doesn't appear to have gone down well with readers. Since the election in November, both the Post and the Times have seen their subscription numbers drop significantly.
Thanks, Tariq. The Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, is one of the most prominent NGOs in America. It calls itself the world's leading expert on anti-Semitism, and, judging by the amount of airtime it gets, plenty of news outlets agree. The issue is that the ADL and its CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, are taken far more seriously than they should be. Those who really know this organization, including some of its former employees, say the ADL's mission to call out and combat anti-Semitism is inherently compromised by its constant defense of the State of Israel. The ADL has pushed to have any criticism of Zionism equated with anti-Semitism, and that has landed Arab and pro-Palestinian groups on the ADL's blacklist. Even Jewish American activists opposed to Israel's occupation and the genocide in Gaza are, in the eyes of the ADL, anti-Semitic. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the Anti-Defamation League.
ADL is in the news and on the front lines, the rejection of anti-Zionism and anti-Israel sentiment.
The Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, says its annual conference is the world's largest summit on anti-Semitism and hate.
Wow, 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 wow.
The event is a showcase of the pull that the ADL has.
Thank you, ADL, for the work that you do for all of us.
It's one of the most well-funded and best-known NGOs in the United States. Its summit takes place in New York, where the ADL is headquartered, and big-name speakers from politics, entertainment, and social media come in for a turn at the podium.
Yes, never is now.
Leading the extravaganza is CEO Jonathan Greenblatt. He's been the frontman of the ADL for a decade, and he's a frequent voice in the media.
Joining us now is Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League.
Thanks so much for being here on this day.
We see Jonathan Greenblatt on cable news programs with such incredible regularity, you would think there's nobody else available.
What do you think these social media platforms are supposed to do? What's the responsible thing to do?
He's ubiquitous partly because he gives the media what they want.
Disturbing rise of extremism. Israel's a country that faces relentless terror attacks. I worry about this every day.
Every time he comes on, he's speaking about a crisis, and that language is appealing to the press.
Anti-Zionism, I've long said, is anti-Semitism. I was wrong. Anti-Zionism is genocide.
Jonathan Greenblatt is a very well-connected political operative, and he's riding this wave of the ADL's name having unwarranted credibility with the media.
And if you wouldn't tolerate it, if someone is wearing a swastika on their arm, I'm sorry, you shouldn't tolerate it if they're wearing a keffiyeh.
All right, Jonathan Greenblatt, thank you so much.
Greenblatt suggested that tolerating people wearing the Palestinian keffiyeh, a basic symbol of Palestinian culture, that is tantamount to tolerating people who are wearing swastikas. He speaks very authoritatively and confidently, but he uses that confidence to aggressively weaponize the charge of anti-Semitism in order to silence any criticism of Israel.
We wrote to the ADL for a response to this characterization of its work, that the organization and its CEO label criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic. We didn't get a response, and that didn't come as a surprise. Greenblatt has made clear what he thinks of Al Jazeera's output.
The Al Jazeera effect. So pumping propaganda 24/7, across people's cell phones and on their television screens.
The ADL was founded in 1913 when waves of anti-Semitism were sweeping across Europe and the United States, and just 3 decades before the rise of Hitler in Germany. The ADL now calls itself the world's leading expert on anti-Semitism. On its website, the organization lists its activities, and its studies on anti-Semitism have become a fixture in American media.
Big increase in anti-Semitic behavior in Florida, that according to the Anti-Defamation League.
You have just finished a report the ADL has on how many incidents we saw in 2018.
We're at historic numbers.
It is horrible what is happening. I know that you are tracking more incidents.
A troubling new survey from the Anti-Defamation League showing that anti-Semitism is on the rise in America.
The ADL does document anti-Semitic incidents, and many of the incidents they document are genuinely anti-Semitic. For example, people being harassed for wearing kippot in public. But especially recently, a lot of the incidents that they've documented as anti-Semitic are actually just protests for Palestinian rights, including protests led and organized by American Jews.
What they do with their data is consistently conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, and that conflation gives them much wider room in order to weaponize that spear in a way that is really effective.
The anti-Israel groups on campus are planning a week of rage. I can't think of anything more grotesque than these pro-Hamas groups.
There's no question, of course, that there is a rise in anti-Semitism in the United States right now. But when you add every pro-Palestine rally that is taking place in the country, numbering over 1,000 events in their statistics as anti-Semitic incidents, we no longer know what the real statistics are. And when you add on top of that the fact that so much of the instances that they recount are confidential and they don't disclose any details about them, it is difficult for any outside party to really discern whether that data is accurate or not.
And by amplifying and uncritically reporting on the ADL's claims of what does and doesn't constitute anti-Semitism, the media is complicit in diverting attention from the real threats of anti-Semitism, from the anti-Semites in the cabinet of the Trump administration, and instead focusing it on 19-year-old activists who are being deported out of this country.
Those deportations of pro-Palestine activists and students have not begun. However, the chances of them happening increased exponentially after Donald Trump renewed an executive order from his first term to, quote, combat anti-Semitism and explore ways to expel pro-Palestine activists from the United States.
We've begun the process of deporting foreign terrorists, jihadists, and Hamas sympathizers.
The Trumpian political movement, which counts white supremacists and self-confessed, quote, Jew haters amongst some of its most ardent supporters, should be a clear point of focus for the ADL's critique. And in the early years of Trump's first term, that was the case.
While it's a bit unclear what the president was trying to say in terms of who Jews are disloyal to, I will be exactly clear on what that was: anti-Semitism.
However, it was clear that the relationship between Trump and anti-Semites wasn't going to affect the one between Trump and the State of Israel, and particularly with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The ADL changed its tune.
Look, I'm optimistic about the Trump administration.
A key thing to understand about the ADL is that it has always had these two aspects of its mission: the fighting anti-Semitism aspect and the defending Israel aspect, although obviously it claims that they're one and the same. But over the years, the defending Israel aspect has both increased in priority and increased in the amount in which it conflicts with and actually undermines the other part of the ADL's mission.
The ADL decided that it's not just Palestinian advocates for a free Palestine who are the enemy. They've also decided that groups like Jewish Voice for Peace is the enemy as well.
So SJP, JVP, and CARE, these groups epitomize the radical left. We'll use our litigation skills to hold them accountable for their harm.
When you have progressive Jewish organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now and many others standing up and saying, no, Israeli war crimes do not represent the American Jewish community or the world Jewish community, and insisting on standing in solidarity with Palestinians,
if not now, we want to welcome you here.
That undermines the narrative that the ADL is pushing. And that is precisely why they make a target out of progressive Jewish organizations.
The ADL has declared Jewish Voice for Peace to be anti-Semitic. Jewish Voice for Peace is an organization of at least 300,000 Jews. It has now said that the Jewish Voice for Peace is not really Jewish, that it's Arab propaganda. Now they're trying to actually discredit the Jewishness of Jews on the left.
Leftist Jews are anti-Semitic. Critics of Zionism, anti-Semitic. Pro-Palestinian symbols and chants, all anti-Semitic. In a world the ADL says is exploding with anti-Semitism, it was almost refreshing to hear the organization say what it doesn't deem anti-Semitic.
Thank you.
Elon Musk's repeated raised arm salutes, deployed just after Trump's swearing in, were taken by many as a symbol designed to appeal to fascists and anti-Semites within the MAGA movement. The ADL was quick to tweet out a different interpretation, one considerably kinder to Musk.
Some context for the Musk incident, I think, is really important. Musk was at war with the ADL when he first took over Twitter. The ADL accused him of allowing anti-Semitism on Twitter, now X, to flourish.
When Elon Musk is amplifying these people, it's very problematic.
And the only thing that has changed since is that in an attempt to redeem his image, Elon Musk traveled to Israel, palled around with Benjamin Netanyahu, and decided to start amplifying anti-Palestinian and pro-Israel propaganda. And all of a sudden, the ADL no longer has a problem with Elon Musk.
Regardless of what the ADL's motivations were, the ADL's statement on Elon Musk's Hitler salute in many ways marks the completion of the ADL's trajectory from a civil rights organization to a willing enabler and partner in the current authoritarian anti-Semitic governing coalition. And it means that citing the ADL when we most need people to take anti-Semitism seriously is extremely reckless and irresponsible.
And finally, the Trump ripple effect is reverberating across the Middle East as well as in Ukraine, Russia, and Europe. This past week, the American president announced the suspension of U.S. military aid to Ukraine. Then he declared the Pentagon would stop sharing intelligence on Russian targets. The White House is hinting that both those policies might change if peace talks with Russia get going again. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is conducting a diplomatic exercise in damage limitation, trying to rebuild ties with Washington after that extraordinary showdown at the White House. Russian news channels, meanwhile, are celebrating this story, one that we will be keeping our eyes on here at The Listening Post.